We have quorum, so we can get started. I promised Nancy in the DCM that this meeting will be easier than yesterday's. It's a low bar, but I'm sure we're going to meet it. So good morning. My name is Councillor Shelley Carroll, and I'm the chair of the Economic and Community Development Committee meeting. We have quorum, and I'm now calling meeting number 5 to order. So welcome, everyone. Today's meeting is being held by video conference and in person at City Hall in Committee Room 1. This meeting is also being live streamed online at youtube.com/Toronto City Council Live. I want to begin with the land acknowledgement. Although we may be meeting in different locations today, the Economic and Community Development Committee would like to acknowledge that the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. If you are, yes, now, some housekeeping rules. Thank you for that. If you are registered to speak at today's meeting, we have just a few speakers. Please listen for me to call your name when we get to your item. I'll call speakers in the order that they appear on our speakers list. That list of speakers can be viewed online by visiting the Economic and Community Development Committee page at toronto.ca/council and clicking on the speakers box that's at the top of the agenda for today's meeting. Members, the City Clerk has provided all agenda materials on toronto.ca/council, but it's also available to you, the members, on the Clerk's meeting portal. Clerk's IT staff are available to members if you need help with your devices to access it. I also want to remind you to please submit and approve any motions by email. Staff are available at ecdc@toronto.ca to help with motions. I understand we have some coming in, but I think they're all submitted. Yeah. Now, are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing none, we're good. Can I get a motion to confirm the minutes of the meeting on May 31st? Councillor Moyes, thank you very much. All in favor? Opposed? That is carried. So that's the minutes taken care of, Madam Secretary. Okay. So I'm going to move to the agenda. Let me just get my device going here. We'll just go quickly through it. Item number 1 is the item that we have speakers for, so we'll definitely hold that one, and we have some motions to be moved there. That's the Alcohol in Parks pilot program. Item number 2, changes to the Upper Village Business Improvement Area Board of Management. Are there any holds or questions there? Seeing none, can I get a motion to adopt the recommendations? Councillor Moyes, all in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Thank you. And item number 3, EC 5.3 is the Theatre Review for Inclusivity and Equity. Councillor Ainsley, I think you wanted to hold that. I think you have a motion you want to move?
I do. I have an amendment that I worked with on staff. Otherwise, I think it's fairly...
Yeah, I wonder, why don't we put it up? Because there aren't any speakers to the item, so perhaps we can make that a quick item.
Yep, more than happy to do that.
Okay, clerks have just posted it. We can see it here.
Okay.
Okay, so you're just adding some parties to the exercise? Is that what I see?
I'm taking some out that are no longer involved. On the advice of the General Manager of Economic and Community Development.
Oh, okay, I see. Yes, I see that in the top part now. Okay, any questions of the mover on that motion? Just wait 1 second. Are you good? Okay, okay. I don't see any questions on that motion. So all in favor of Councillor Ainsley's amendments? We're good. No opposed. On the item as a whole. Actually that amendment includes the item, so we're good. The item is adopted. Okay, you're good.
Thank you.
Thank you. So that just leaves us with the one and only item with speakers. And that is item number 1, the Alcohol in Parks Pilot Program. Do council need any kind of presentation from staff, or are we just doing questions of staff? Because if that's the case, we can go straight to the speakers. Yes, that's the one question. Did you bring any samples?
Madam Speaker, I mean, if staff has a presentation, I think it's best to do it.
I don't see, oh, there we are. Were staff planning any kind of presentation, or do you just want to field questions? Okay, so we'll hear from the speakers first. Is Adam Rogers with us? Is that person online or in person? We don't see them logged in, and it is item number 1, so they would have been told to be here for 9:30. Okay, so we can give them a couple more minutes. I can move to Mr. Moran. We'll hear his deputation, then we'll call for Adam Rogers once more. Good morning, Derek. I don't need to tell you the drill. We're desperately hoping that you'll be talking about the item, but you have 5 minutes.
You know me so well, Councillor Kell from the Police Board. I just want to say, by me speaking at this meeting, this shall not be deemed to be in any way my consent, expressed or implied. In doing so is fraud. God bless His Majesty the King. Long live His Majesty the King. And let the record show that I do not consent to the warrantless searches taking place downstairs here at Toronto City Hall. So, Section 608-8 of the Roman Municipal Civil Law Code of the Corporation of the City of Toronto says, while in a park, no person shall... Did you know that former Deputy Chief Shauna Coxon once admitted to me that the Crown is the surety for the person? I don't know why I mentioned that, but I'm just putting it out there. A, have in their possession an open container of any liquor unless in a designated area authorized by permit and with the approval of the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario. B, provide, supply, or in any way make liquor available to persons who on the basis of age are not permitted to be supplied with liquor under the Ontario Liquor License Act. Or C, consume, serve, or sell liquor unless in a designated area authorized by permit and with the approval of the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario. Now, since the lawyer's term of art, persons, was mentioned twice in here, I should point out that there's a maxim of law that every definition in the civil law is dangerous, for there is very little that cannot be overthrown. And there's about, I think, 40 definitions in the definition section for this chapter, and none of them provide a definition for person. So if I've ever led the corporation of the City of Toronto to believe in any way that I am a person that is not defined among the 40 definitions provided in definition section for Chapter 608, then that would be a mistake, and that I ask all of you to please forgive me. And remember, it says in the Bible twice that God has no respect for persons. So just in case I get busted for drinking beer in a park without getting permission from my servants first to do it, this is from Franchise Tax Board of California versus Hyatt 2019, where the U.S. Supreme Court said, the founding era's foremost expert on the law of nations, Emer de Vattel, who stated that a sovereign is exempt from all foreign jurisdiction, quoting Vattel from his text, The Law of Nations. Now, you probably heard this 100 times, and especially Jane Burton over there from the Toronto Police Board, but it should be noted on what the courts have to say about what a bylaw is. Unbelievably, this case is only cited once on Canley. This is from Patak versus Sabah, 2004. The Superior Court of Justice said, bylaws are regulations, ordinances, rules, or laws adopted by a corporation for its government. The function of a bylaw is to prescribe the rights and duties of the members with reference to the internal government of the corporation, the management of its affairs, and the rights and duties existing between the members inter se. That's cited from Mackenzie versus Maple Mountain Mining Company, 1910. I think that's a Court of Appeal case, but that case itself isn't even reported on Canley. And inter se is a Latin law term that means between or among themselves of a right or duty owed between the parties rather than to others. Because I told a story recently at the police board, Langenfeld, Chris Langenfeld from taking Mark Saunders to court. We're waiting, and the matter before it, Justice Jill Copeland, who's now a Court of Appeal justice, this lawyer came looking for a summary judgment. And Justice Copeland was like, I'm prepared to give you the summary judgment that you're looking for, but you know what? You don't have much law here, do you? You're really just relying on statute to support your argument. I'll tell you what, if you come back in a month with, say, 3 pieces of case law, I'll give you what you're seeking for the summary judgment. The guy's like, sure. And I'm sitting there going, and just like this light bulb goes off in my head. It's like, okay, Justice Jill Copeland either said that statutory rules, like probably aren't not the law, but like aren't really the law, well, they're part of the law, but they are inferior, and that the case law developed by the courts is really what they consider to be law. So now because I miss you at the police board. Hopefully, with the new mayor, you feel comfortable coming back. I don't know why you're laughing about that. And I just wanted to also mention that there's a simple definition for bylaw in Bouvier Law's Dictionary from 1856, that rules and ordinances made by a corporation for its own government. And Ontario is a common law jurisdiction where the rules of equity prevail.
Okay, thank you. That was on topic. Thanks, Derek. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you so much.
And thank you for not violating my freedom of expression.
100%. Do we have Mr. Rogers? Is Adam Rogers? Has he phoned in? Okay, seeing none. It was item number 1, so I don't feel like it's being harsh 20 minutes in to move to questions. So I'm going to proceed. So we'll go straight to questions of staff. Councillor Malik, did you have questions of staff? Okay.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate the opportunity to ask some questions. As I previously shared, I shared it at council, and as we've been having discussions about this program, I am very determined to see this program succeed. And one of the biggest concerns is how we will be dealing with the problems as they arise to ensure that this program is able to see success in the time-bound pilot. What is the plan in regards to issues management during the pilot?
Through you, Madam Speaker, and thanks for the question. We do have a plan around ongoing issues management during the pilot, which includes a sort of issues management or steering committee that involves all the divisions that you see here behind me, including paramedics, fire, police, MLS, public health, who am I forgetting, solid waste, and everybody, where we will be meeting weekly to review across the city any issues that come up, any complaints that are coming in through 311 or through the councillors' offices. We'll be sharing that data with all the councillors who are involved in the pilot, who have pilot parks in their wards, and we'll also be following up directly with councillors if there are any additional issues on top of that require some additional attention for us to think about how to resolve. So that's the approach right now. We also, of course, welcome any outreach from individual councillors who are having any specific issues, and we'll have a few people designated as the touchdown for those issues coming in, so you'll know exactly who to call.
So that interdivisional implementation team that you referenced, IIT, will be dealing with issues that arise across the city. Can you speak a little bit more to what work is being done by staff in local communities to report to the IIT, and how we're ensuring that local voices are heard?
Thanks, and through the chair. So we will be working directly with our staff on the ground to bring forward any issues, and Donna, our Director of Parks, and our Parks Operations folks have relationships with many of the community groups that are on the ground in these parks, and we'll certainly use that as a place where we can garner some information. We'll also be working directly with councillors who receive many comments that are not directly forwarded to us to ensure that all of the comments that are coming back out of the community are at least gathered in the same place so we can see them all together, so there is no sort of split on where some of this information is seen. And, if there are community organizations or individuals that want to have discussion around the pilots that are going on, we're also completely willing, able, and set up to have those conversations one-on-one with those community residents or organizations.
So one of the parks in my ward has a long history of being known to be a place where the pilot was being tested before it was a pilot. And I just wanted to hear a little bit more about what work Parks, Forestry, and Recreation has done in the past to deal with any issues that have arisen in the park and how that will change as part of the pilot.
So through the speaker, and I know the park you're speaking of, not to single it out, but there are a few parks, to your point, that have been known locations for this type of activity prior to the pilots happening. So the approach that we have right now, and I can pass to Carlton to talk around the enforcement piece, but it's not generally a proactive enforcement model, it's a reactive enforcement model. So if there are complaints that are coming forward, we would then dispatch the appropriate personnel to those parks. And those personnel would include MLS, as well as potentially some community police officers who often tour our parks on bicycles just as a matter of daily sort of check-ins in various parks across the city. So we'll be continuing to use that model, and if there's a need to change it as the model continues, we'll have a look at that as well. I think does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess it's, in terms of folks who are in the community who have had experience with this, if the model has been reactive versus proactive in the past, so what I hear is that that's not changing with the pilot. Are there responses to issues that are raised that you can see a different course of action because we are in the kind of pilot space?
So through the chair, I'm going to ask Carlton to answer as well, but I would say that there are some known parks that have had additional issues even prior to the pilot that are generally higher on our radar around ongoing management and observation. And a few of the parks that you're talking about are those parks for activities that go on generally during the day, but also into the evening. So I'm going to pass it to Carlton to answer as well.
Grant.
So thank you, Janie, and thank you, Councillor Malik, for the question. Yeah, we have a list of 30 to 35 problematic parks where we have a history of complaints or activity that we regularly patrol as part of our patrols. Again, it's done in association with the Toronto Police Service and our colleagues in parks as well. And it's not an enhanced presence, but again, we try to focus where the problems are. Again, I think it's been clear that we cannot be everywhere at the same time with 1,500 parks. And that's why we focus on areas that are problematic, and we make sure we have routine patrols to ensure that we're aware of what's happening and we are able to react accordingly.
I do see the time. I just have one final question, if that's okay.
Oh, okay, I was going to suggest we do a round and maybe come
it's
back
just
to a
one final
second, but
question,
if
and
you
then
just have one, why don't you go ahead and
Yeah, thank you
field
very
it.
much.
Yeah.
And appreciate the responses to my last question. I think what has been a really important motivating piece behind this pilot is the pieces around harm reduction and going in a direction that isn't about over enforcement, over policing, and being able to make sure that that core driving piece of this pilot is honored and respected in that way. Before council implemented the pilot program, one of the pillars of the proposed report was to create an equitable system. Now that council has chosen to go in a direction that gives the local councillor, the power to choose, and that, my take on that. What work can be done beyond the pilot program to bring more equity to this program right across the city?
So through the speaker, we are bound by the direction of council around consulting with individual councillors for an opt-in model, so to speak. And the list that we've been working in the wards where councillors have expressed interest are based on the equitable access principles that you just spoke about. We looked at density in neighborhoods, availability of green space in all of those wards. So beyond that, around other wards in the cities that are not part of the pilot, the only comment I would really make is that we will be watching the pilot. We also want the pilot to be successful, and with the hope that if the pilot is successful, it will stand as an example of potentially enrolling other areas of the city that have not yet been enrolled in yet. And that will be part of the evaluation approach that we take when we report back on the pilot next year, I think in January. With some recommendations as well around the next steps on the pilot.
Right, okay, thank you. So we've been joined by some of the rest of our committee in the interim. I have Councillor Moyse down for questions, but why don't I start a list, and I'm going to take a show of hands online. Councillor Robinson.
Sorry, Madam Chair.
Yes?
Sorry, I was just going to say Councillor Robinson has her hand up.
I know, that's why I said Councillor Robinson just now. I got it. Thanks, Councillor Ainsley. Yeah. Okay, so I've got Councillor Moyse, Councillor Robinson. Councillor Ainsley, did you have some questions?
No, I don't.
Councillor Mantis?
I was just trying to draw your attention to Councillor Robinson. Thank you.
It is, as you know, hybrids are difficult, aren't they? Councillor Mantis, will you have questions of staff?
Not at this time.
Okay, and Councillor Thompson. So I have Moyse, Robinson, Thompson. Councillor Moyse, do you want to go ahead?
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and through you, I do have a few questions here. So the report mentioned that our parks have operating hours between 5:30 a.m. and midnight, and the pilot program will only operate within those time frames. Could you explain how enforcement will work outside of the operating hours?
Sorry, Councillor, I didn't hear the end of the question.
Could you, that's no worries. Could you explain how enforcement will work outside of the operating hours?
I'm looking at Mr. Grant.
Yeah, so thank you for the question. That is a challenge with all 1,500 parks, regardless of the activity. You're not permitted to be in a park, even to walk through that park at 4:30 in the morning or at 12:01 p.m. That is a huge challenge. It has been a challenge forever. We do have, our teams are also not 24-hour. They are not overnight. We recognize things happen beyond those hours. And if things are happening that are in the nuisance or criminal activity, that would be something that should be referred to the Toronto Police Service.
Okay, thank you. I never understood how we don't have this is a 24-hour city, but we have limited hours as to when enforcement take place. Anyways, but my second question is actually, I received a lot of emails from my constituents about this, and this is why I'm asking this question. Is there any opportunity to expand the pilot for the winter season? Toronto is a year-round city, after all. Would staff consider or be in favor of extending the pilot into the winter?
Through the speaker, we were directed around the summer. Certainly, I think winter is a possibility. We haven't addressed it in the report, but it's something we can take back and consider around that use. My feeling on it is if the pilot is successful in the summer, there may be a good reason to expand that into the winter if people are interested.
Okay. All right. And so, again, reading the report, we know that cities like Montreal, Vancouver, and Calgary have had their own pilot programs. Some have expanded it, and others, have not. But I think overall, they have been successful. Is there anything from those cities that you've decided not to implement? And what have you learned from these?
I'll start around what we've learned, and then Sandra may be able to comment on what we're not doing, if there is anything that we're not doing. I'm not sure the answer to that question, but we have learned from the interjurisdictional scan, and we've spoken to all those cities, and we've looked at all of their reports, and we've done all of that. What we've learned is that the less rules, so to speak, the more successful the pilot. So considerations around timing and time limitations and those sorts of things have changed because they have not seen the need to enforce from that perspective. So if anything, what we've seen from a pilot into the permanent sort of application of that change is a lessening of the rules, and more so that the activity can take place successfully outside of an enforcement environment. So that's what we've learned from cities, and we've tried to adapt those learnings into the criteria that we've established as well. But as I've noted, this is a pilot. It's the first time we've done it in Toronto, and we'll be tracking all of those things and reporting back on it when the pilot comes to an end for consideration around changes around what was successful and what potentially we need to change. I should say, we're very cognizant of the fact that every city is different and every city has different groups and users of parks, and we're learning from the other pilot locations and those that have become permanent, but we don't yet have a Toronto sort of example of how this type of pilot would play out in the parks in Toronto. We're anticipating through what we've learned from others that the criteria we've put together will be successful in the short term, but again, we'll be watching those criteria as we move forward. And Sandra, if you want to comment on anything we're not doing.
Through the chair, so the only thing I would add is that as the jurisdictional review reveals, there have been different approaches on how pilots have been implemented. We are really looking to Vancouver, who has this sort of all-park approach with restrictions versus having a designated picnic table or a designated picnic area, which we heard from the other cities, and Vancouver actually started that way and then changed their model because it's very difficult to enforce.
Sorry to interrupt, Sandra, can you pull your microphone a little
sorry.
closer? Thanks.
My apologies.
For the online listeners.
Oh, okay. Should I start again? My apologies.
Helpful for the online listeners, yeah.
Absolutely. No, so the only thing I would add is that from what we learned from other cities is where we've gone a bit differently is looked at the pilot design, because we're looking at an all-park approach, meaning we are allowed drinking in all areas with restrictions. Vancouver's actually, we learned from Vancouver because they started off with a designated model, meaning that they had designated picnic tables or picnic areas, which actually tends to be the model in other cities. But what we heard from our counterparts in those jurisdictions is that that line around those boundaries is very hard to enforce. Communicating where people can and cannot drink in a park is very difficult to communicate, and there was a lot of confusion. That's what they found through the evaluations. So hence our model is we're kind of taking Vancouver's lead on this one, on this all-park approach. I say that would be one of the learnings where we've learned and we're designing for Toronto specifically.
Okay,
Okay,
just one final question perhaps? No?
sure.
Okay.
This is the one extra question meeting today. Go ahead, Councillor
The
Royce.
one concern I have, though, is that this pilot is only for 2 months, and most pilots that I know of in this city, in Toronto and even beyond, is usually longer than that. Are we able to really get a good sample size? I mean, even getting people to know about this and just gather the information that we need to make an informed decision. Do you feel that 2 months isn't enough of a time?
Through the speaker, I think 2 months is a start for sure, and a longer period would give us better information. I think we'll be able to get a sense through this initial pilot on how it's rolling out, and 2 months is what's before us right now, and we'll have to see how it goes. I'm not sure. Not sure what the future will bring from the 2 months, but I think it is enough time to start something like this.
Okay, thank you.
Wondered if Mr. Grant wanted to, is that for bylaw enforcement? Do you get enough of a profile with the 2 months?
I think that is when our parks are used the most. So those 2 months will be useful. Is it perfect? No. Will it give us a sense? Absolutely. But so we're trying. We want to make this work. We want to make it enjoyable for all, and we want to get the data that we need. And Councillor Moyes is exactly correct, for you and your peers to make an informed decision. So that is the data we will collect. It will be data, and it will also be observations. So it will be both quantitative and qualitative information that we use to monitor this program.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that question, Councillor Moyes. Councillor Robinson, you're next. Do you have questions of staff?
I guess my first question is underage drinking. How do you, how will you deal with that issue? We certainly had it in some of our parks and more so our TDSB properties in Ward 15 during COVID, so underage drinking.
So it's Carlton here. I'll start. The underage drinking, public nuisance, public drinking, not sure.
If you want, just hold on a sec, Mr. Grant, we're getting feedback. Oh, Councillor Robinson, we need you to mute while you're receiving your answers. There we go. Try now.
Okay. Yeah, that's much better. Thank you. Very difficult to concentrate with echoes. Underage drinking, the short answer is underage drinking is not something that we enforce. We would educate. You probably shouldn't be doing that, but again, it is really a police matter.
Councillor Robinson?
Okay, so the police, how will the police address this?
So we have the police online. Brent Nichols.
You do. It's
Mr. Nicol.
sorry. Good morning. I'm acting staff superintendent Brett Nicol from Westfield Command. Yes, as far as the Toronto Police approach, we're going to be maintaining our routine and general patrols as we always have. There's no plan at this point to increase enforcement. But we will be responding to community complaints and calls for service in relation to underage drinking. But as I said, there won't be any increased patrol in an attempt to conduct more enforcement in relation to that.
How quickly can you respond? So I had an incident in my park a few weeks ago and it actually took over a day for a response. So what's the response time predicted?
I couldn't give you a prediction. It's based on the time of day, day of the week, but underage drinking in a park would be a low priority radio call.
It would be deemed low priority. Okay, just so we understand. Thank you. Is the medical officer of health there? I'd like to know the medical officer of health's position on this.
We do have the medical officer of health.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair, obviously public health has been consulted here, and no question, I think when it comes to alcohol, I'd like to think that we're very clear as public health, and certainly myself as the medical officer of health, that there are harms associated with alcohol. No question about that. That is actually very well demonstrated in the scientific literature. What is also well demonstrated is that alcohol is part and parcel of our culture. It is a legal product that is available, and there are, the vast majority of people use alcohol in moderation. And there is a health aspect, a positive health aspect to gathering together with people in celebration, and alcohol often forms a component of that. So as far as we're concerned, looking at trying to mitigate harms associated with alcohol, and in particular in respect of this pilot, certainly the pilot nature of this and some of the provisions that are included in the report get to trying to minimizing those risks, making sure that people are aware of good information, how to protect their health, making sure that the pilot is occurring in places where there is access to public transit, where there is access to water fountains, where there is access to washroom facilities. These are the kinds of provisions that certainly consider public health writ large. And of course, the opportunity to evaluate and assess during this pilot period provides us with another opportunity to mitigate any potential harms that might be associated.
Okay, thank you. And so evidence does show, though, increasing accessibility increases harm to the general population. Is that accurate?
So through you, Madam Chair, yes, that is true. Sorry, I think we need the mute.
Councillor Robinson, I need you to mute. Sorry, it's kind of a new quirky thing with WebEx. We get feedback unless you mute as soon as you finish posing your question.
So
Yeah, the
sorry.
problem is I did mute. I did mute.
Okay, it's better
I
now.
muted right away, so
So through you,
I'm
Madam
gonna
Chair.
mute again.
I think we're still getting feedback. Okay, so once again, through you, Madam Chair. There is certainly scientific evidence that increasing access and increasing points of procurement for alcohol certainly leads to larger and greater population level harms. We know that alcohol is a carcinogen, no question. There are other harms associated with alcohol. That's why, as part and parcel of this pilot, we are intending to put out information to make sure that resources are readily available to members of the public. You've heard, I've made reference to some of the safety provisions that have been accounted for in this pilot. So again, we're seeing a lot of effort here trying to make sure that public health considerations are actively accounted for, and the opportunity to evaluate the pilot provides us with yet another opportunity to understand the impacts on a larger basis.
Okay, thank you very much. My next question is for parks.
This will have to be your last
I
question,
believe.
Councillor Robinson. We're over time, so this will be your last question.
Okay, the two people prior to me went to 7.5 minutes, but anyway.
Yeah, they did that by posing a question after the 5 minutes, so this is your question after the 5 minutes.
Okay. Okay, Eglinton Park is full of kids learning to play soccer from, I don't know, probably 3-4 years old up. I see that's been identified one. It's not my ward, but it's close to my ward, and my residents play in that ward. So why would that be identified, given there's so many small children playing there almost every day?
So through the speaker, we did look at the criteria and at Eglinton Park, which is a fairly large park. And as noted, there are restrictions within the criteria around the areas of the park that you would be allowed to drink in that exclude areas like playgrounds and the soccer fields. So it's a large park. It's a large park in an area of the city that doesn't have many large parks, which is why it's one that we specifically looked at.
Are you okay with that answer, Councillor Robinson?
No, I don't think that was an answer. My question was specific to soccer leagues, North Toronto Soccer League, which represents my area and my Coles area, using that facility daily and being like hundreds of kids. Why would that park be chosen given its proximity to young children and teenagers?
So through the speaker, I think, Councillor, through the speaker to you, Councillor Robinson, I think it's probably best if we review the actual park diagram with you to show you the areas of the park that there would not be drinking allowed and where it would be allowed. As my understanding is, it best meets the criteria, and that was our intention, was to try and find as good a fit as possible, and that was the discussion and the review that we had with Councillor Cole, who I believe is the councillor for that ward.
Okay, I'm going to move to Councillor Thompson, and then I'll ask all the members if they need another round. But let's see how we do here. Councillor Thompson, and then myself. Councillor Thompson, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and good morning. Through you to staff, you've been working on this report for some time, is that correct?
To the speaker, that's correct. We have been directed on it a few times, and we've been working on the base research for the report for some time.
Right, and part of the delay was as a result of COVID and other things that you were doing in terms of the reason why it's actually here now as opposed to perhaps a year or two ago. Is that correct?
That's correct. We were actually directed to this specific meeting and this specific council around the report back.
So we're on a let's do, let's go approach now with respect to the pilot.
That's correct.
All right, and what we're looking at though is responsible drinking in our parks, right? That's really what the objective and goals are.
So through the speaker, that's absolutely correct. The idea and the legislation that was actually changed provincially around that is around personal consumption of alcohol and also around responsible consumption of alcohol. Public drunkenness, so to speak, continues to not be allowed in
Right.
parks and through the legislation.
Because I wanted to get to that, because
Yeah.
that's really what we want to guard against. And so the issue around limiting where you can consume in specific parks, you're not suggesting that there is a specific area that you limit, but you are saying that there are areas with respect to where you can't go or some distance measures has to be in place,
Through the speaker.
particularly relates to children, playgrounds and so on.
That's correct. So it's a restrictions approach rather than a designated area approach.
Right, which designated it specifically broader area as opposed to restricting it to a defined area, because this is a much more all-inclusive approach.
That's correct. And the reason for that being that I think through some of the discussions specifically with Vancouver is the designated area, not only is it difficult to enforce, but it becomes a focus within a park of a smaller area within the park and might actually bring too many people together into one specific area.
Right, and did you take religious concerns into consideration? And I ask, and let me clarify the focus of my question. I've had some groups in my community who have said, we don't want this in our parks. And I remind them, though, the park's for everyone, not just for a specific group of people. But there are some who've said, well, what happens if we're having a major event? Is there a situation in which there are limits or distance where people who are consuming alcohol must be or should be from their specific event? Did you take that into consideration?
Through the speaker, the religious considerations around these public spaces was not one of the criteria that we found through the interjurisdictional review that we did. My hope is that the consumption will be responsible and will not pose a problem, but if it is something that poses a problem during the pilot, it will certainly be something that we consider during the evaluation.
And you'd hope that people just use some common sense.
That's the hope.
Can you help me then to understand, in terms of signage, will there be signage posted? And Mr. Grant, I'll get you thinking about this question because this one's for you. Will you have additional officers to help with respect to the enforcement aspects? So signage and enforcement.
Sure, so I'll start with signage. We already have some draft signage that's being developed that will be in all of the pilot locations on, I'm going to say the rolling sign structures, but that will at least announce that the park is a pilot location. We've also been working with public health, with Toronto Public Health on some messaging from a public health perspective, as Dr. Davila noted. So that will be prominent in the parks and all the pilot parks will also have additional information on our websites, and we'll be using our regular communication, social media channels and all of those approaches.
Thank you.
Pass the enforcement piece over, Mr. Grant.
Thanks, Janie, and thanks, Councillor Thompson, for the question. Recognizing this is a pilot, it's for 2 months. This will be done within existing resources. We are not putting additional resources on this. We have a Parks and Open Space team of 31 staff across the city, divided up by districts that will work on in areas where we need to patrol and areas where we are receiving complaints.
Got you, thank you. Some time ago, through you, Madam Chair, a specific councillor had proposed specific quantity and amounts that you could have and so on. We're not proposing any of that, is that correct?
Through the speaker, no, we're not. And certainly our understanding through the pilots was that is also very difficult to enforce, almost impossible.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for that question. I'll start the clock on myself. I just have a couple of questions because my colleagues have asked some great ones. There's been a lot of talk in the media about the glaring absence of parks in some areas, and I'll cop to that because it was very difficult in North York. Pardon me, my throat today. The founding fathers of North York designed parks by attaching them all to schools. Almost every park in North York is adjacent to a school with no fence between schoolyard and park, which created a really challenging time, giving us a list of parks to recommend. That's why I end up with one small park in my ward. I'm wondering if we do get, if we get a good result from the pilot, if that happens to be the case, can we continue the jurisdictional review so that we look at what happens post-pilot in other cities? Can that criteria be adjusted and loosened so that we do get the equity that councillors in the other areas would like to see, so that we are making offerings in those
Appreciate
parts
the
of
question,
town?
and a great question. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think the answer is yes. We will be monitoring the pilot. The idea around a pilot is a test run to see what works and where things may not be working, and then it gives us the opportunity to change things and come back with either a second version of the pilot or a more permanent approach to how we would approach this in the future. So I think the answer is yes, and we're hoping that we can learn things this summer that we'll be able to apply to looking at, you know, different criteria as we move forward around things that are working and may not be working.
Right, and you actually introduced in your answer, we could even do that in a pilot way. As was the case in Vancouver, they changed the criteria a little bit, but still called it a pilot the second summer to continue the monitoring.
Yeah, absolutely, it's correct. I just note that it's a pilot that is looking at behavioral change.
Right.
And it is something that we need to monitor as we go. And behavioral change like this may take some time to adjust to a way that is a reasonable approach to this in the long run.
Right. I wanted to ask a question of the medical officer of health. And it's about, I want to bring forward something that you shared with us when we were deciding whether to have a pilot or not. But I want to bring it forward because I think it sort of passed quickly and we forgot about it. You shared with us an interesting study on consumption, that there's a sort of a bell curve with respect to creating regulation around alcohol versus the incidence of harm from alcohol. There's a bell curve around how many rules you set around it.
So through you, Madam Chair, it's actually what we call a U-shaped curve. And the characterization of that is it's the paradox of prohibition. So when it comes to substance use in general, the understanding is that the way in which you mitigate or minimize harms to the greatest extent possible is by creating a proper regulatory environment. If, in fact, you are increasingly prohibitive in respect of consumption of substances, the harms to people, to health, and to society tend to go up. By the same token, the more permissive you are, the more market-driven, the more commercialized access is to substances, once again, you see harms to health and society go up. Hence, it's a U-shaped curve.
Right.
You know, whether you're on the prohibition or the very free market access to a substance, harms go up. And it's in the middle where you have a stronger regulatory environment that we're able to see and appreciate lesser harms to society and to health writ large.
Right, right. So we've had, for instance, we've had some feedback in the media of why don't you just get on with this, and what are all these rules anyway, and that's kind of silly. But based on that study, you would advocate, if you're going to go ahead with this, you do have to wrap some rules around it to try and encourage it to be a responsible activity.
So through you, Madam Chair, generally when it comes to substance use, again, a good regulatory environment is the kind of environment, creating an environment that actually supports people to make good health choices, and that includes good regulation, is the way to minimize and to mitigate harms related to any substance. And I think this can be said for pretty much any public health issue. It's always a question of trying to find balance. And I think my colleague, Ms. Romoff, spoke to you know, how the many factors that are involved when you're dealing with issues that involve behavior change. So I think the opportunity to study is also helpful.
Yes, Thank you. Those are my questions. Councillors had, each had one more question. Are people okay, or do we need a second round on this? I think people got their questions answered. Okay. Seeing that, I'm going to move to speakers. I know a couple of you have motions. Councillor Moyse, I think Councillor Ainsley has a motion. Can I make you the first two people to speak? Okay, Councillor Moyse, go ahead.
Sure, thank you. And through my,
Sir?
I said sure.
Oh, I thought I heard sir. I need a drink.
Sure.
Oh, I'm fine with sir. Sir is just fine.
I need a drink, please.
I need one too. I do have an amendment, Madam Speaker. Thank you. Amend recommendation 1 by adding Underpass Park, Ward 13, to the list of parks to be included in the Alcohol Parks and Pilot Program. So I want to start by thanking staff. I know that as Councillor Thompson mentioned earlier, this has been an ongoing work, and you know, I see the effects of the work in there. And also to thank you to my fellow councillors who actually participated. You know, I'm not here, you know, as a morality police as councillor. I think, you know, we need to let the public have input and decide what it is that they want and not want, and for us as representatives to, you know, follow their lead, I'm going to say, and do what is best for them. Again, as also alluded to, people already drink in parks. You know, it's been very hot the last couple of days. You know, people want to go out and have a, you know, a cool drink and under a tree or something because it's maybe pretty hot in their apartments. So, you know, I support that. And as Councilor Malik mentioned as well, the equity piece is important as well. Not only when it comes to perhaps looking at it in an equity lens. Sorry. My watch is talking to me.
It needs a drink.
Yeah, we all do. It's the weather. But, you know, for me, you know, as a black man, you know, I know that people are stopped.
Black?
What?
I knew you're black.
Can I finish my comments? This guy is saying.
It's okay, I need a drink.
Okay, this is the danger of having a short agenda.
Yeah. You know, we have to be mindful of different, you know, people when it comes to economics and anti-black racism and the like. Also, too, I was on a call-in show on Monday at CBC today, and a lot of the calls that came in talked about young people and that their behaviors and all that stuff. I feel that, you know, we should not also stigmatize young people as well. You know, I hope when it comes to enforcement, there's an education piece when we approach perhaps people who may not be in compliance, especially young people. So I do hope that this program is successful. I think, you know, it's also an opportunity for us to look at our parks in different ways when it comes to, you know, winterizing our washrooms, making sure that they are a safe space for all, and they're used year-round, you know, because we are, you know, this is Canada after all, and we have 4 seasons, and winter being one of them. I think it's important to make sure we look at these spaces in a holistic way. And I do hope that we do get the data that we need out of this pilot project, even if it's a short period. I hope perhaps if more time is needed, we'll extend the time allotted to include perhaps the winter months, just so that we get a flavor as to what it would be like during that time period as well, and provide the feedback that is needed to this council, eventually to council, and make an informed decision when the time comes. So again, thank you, Madam Speaker, to staff and to the councillors who have agreed to participate in this program.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Moyes. Councillor Ainsley, before I go to, I was in such a hurry to get the motions on the floor that I forgot to ask our guest, Councillor Malik. So I'm going to go back to Councillor Malik, and then we'll come back into committee. Councillor Malik, you want to speak?
Thank you very much. And I just want to echo Councillor Moyes and what everyone at the committee, and I know Beyond has shared as well, in terms of thanking city staff for their quick work and implementation on this pilot program. Council gave you a tight timeframe, and I'm glad to see the serious effort that has been put forward in making sure that the pilot can be a success for this season. It's vital for this program to succeed, and we need to have staff from across the city working to ensure issues are addressed in a timely and safe manner to ensure all parks users and neighbors continue to feel comfortable and protected. We know that many Torontonians, especially in neighborhoods like ours, in neighborhoods like mine, in Spadina, Fort York, don't have private backyards of their own and count on our parks to enjoy the summer months in particular. And while I have said again and again, I support this pilot program, I've also said that I do believe the decision that City Council made on the design of the pilot program is flawed. Other jurisdictions have approached similar pilot programs, as we've heard, on a citywide basis, using the expertise of staff to determine the best options in every part of their city. And at the May Council meeting, I put forward a motion to have a time-bound pilot across the city with the best options presented by staff, alongside councillors, not just at the discretion of individual councillors to determine what is the safest and most equitable path forward. And while this item lost on a tie, I am determined to continue to push for a citywide system that treats everyone fairly and equitably addresses concerns. Thankfully, through Parks, Forestry, and Recreation and the staff there, I will be in touch with representatives from Public Health, Toronto Police Services, and Municipal Licensing and Standards to ensure the pilot runs smoothly, and any issues in our local communities will be dealt with immediately and with efficiency. And that community members are a part of the reflection and debrief and the improvement of the program when the pilot concludes. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Malik. Councillor Ainsley.
Or Carol,
Yep.
I have a motion that I would like to move.
Yes, I think we can put it up. It's up there now.
Thank you. And the motion is amend recommendation number 1 by adding Morningside Park, Ward 24, Scarborough Guildwood, 390 Morningside Avenue to the list of parks to be included in the Alcohol in Parks pilot program. And I hope I can ask for everybody's support. I've lived my entire life in Eastern Scarborough, spent a lot of time in Morningside Park. This pilot project has been happening in Morningside Park for a long time, and I would like to make it official. I've had a lot of outreach from residents who live in the high number of apartment buildings around Morningside Park, and the one word they always talk about is fun. That fun brings people together, and having a barbecue or a picnic in a park and putting alcohol or beer in a thermos or a coffee cup when the police come by, even sometimes the police encouraging them to put their beer or alcohol in a container so they don't see it when they go by. I think the police have much better things to be doing with their time. Enjoying a picnic in a park, doing it responsibly, brings people together, which I think is a key component of life in this park. Having people trying to socialize in an apartment or on a balcony, neighbors in a little tiny green space that might be the lawn of an apartment building or the back lawn next to dumpsters is not bringing people together. So I would really like to have the support of my colleagues to put forward this motion to continue to enliven Morningside Park and bringing people together in Eastern Scarborough. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Ainsley. I started your clock late, but you still would have come in under the 5. So I have Councillor Thompson next.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I'm going to raise my glass to the pilot program, and I'll take a sip. In as much as I don't have a part in the pilot program, because I don't want one. However, I am interested in the information in the report, because everybody in my parks currently participate in their own pilot programs. And I've seen it firsthand. I've actually been in the parks where the people are, and I see what they're doing with their children, and they're having a, adult beverage in a way that is mature, taking care of things, responsible for taking care of their own containers and so on. So I'm not going to miss a beat with respect to my community. In fact, the park in my ward that the staff have sort of identified as a potential park that could be used for the pilot, it's probably the park that I would not have selected myself personally, because it has such proximity to kids and basketball and so on, which is great. But I wouldn't use that particular. I'd probably use Thompson Park, where I will say it is extremely well managed and run by all the people that are there, Justin and team and Brian Angus and so on. In fact, Madam Chair, just a couple of weeks ago, I was riding my bike through Thompson Park, and folks were setting up for birthday parties and just general picnics, and they had their supplies of products, and they kept them in a way that reflected the policy, which is you can't really do it, but leave it out of sight, out of mind, and you can consume and so on. The staff there have never given they've given me any problems to those people participating. The issue of fairness and equity, I've seen it firsthand. Everyone is treated the same. As long as you maintain a discretion in terms of your approach and consumption, go ahead and do what needs to be done. So I don't believe that my area is being deprived, because we're not a city of no, we're a city of we will do based on research and being more responsible in terms of our approach. Many jurisdictions, I was in Paris and I saw people sitting around drinking whatever they wanted to drink. Nobody bothered them. I was in other places and around the world, people consume. In our system, we have created this environment where you refrain from, or you create this avoidance. And what happens, particularly when our young people, when they have the ability, they overindulge, because we keep them constrained and we keep the product contained in a way that we say, no, you should never do this because it is so wrong. But as adults, we're doing it, so if it's wrong for us, if it's wrong for children, it should be wrong for us as well. Well, it's not. It's about a healthy way in terms of consumption. We understand that, alcohol and any other products could create certain harm to individuals. And Dr. Davila has respondedly and indicate sort of where the measures are and the rules that we want to put in place. I was always waiting for the pilot to come forward based on structure. Ms. Romanoff and her team were working on that. We've seen a situation where there's a bit of an injection by others who wanted to create more of a profile for themselves. So let's just do it now. And by the way, you can only allow this quantity and this amount and so on. And it's like this proof exactly how do you police that? Makes no sense whatsoever. What does make sense is a thoughtful process that we now have in place that has logic associated and research associated with. This is what we've always wanted. It just hadn't happened because there were so many other priorities that we in fact were working on. And so what do we have now? A system that is going to be measured, tested. Yes, you can complain about the fact that it's not long enough. But I think we're there already, because many people can give you the results of their sort of input on the pilot, because most people accept that. And we agree that that's appropriate. But we have to ensure that we have control, we have the process in place, we are measured in terms of how we deal with these things. We can't just sort of say it's a free-for-all, because that's not our frame as a city of Toronto. So we're making a made in Toronto solution about the responsible consumption of alcohol in our city. We're not saying no, we're saying this is how we do it responsibly, and that is the best way. So I want to thank the staff, Ms. Romanoff, the times that we've talked about this and the process and everyone involved. And of course, Mr. Grant, thank you all very much. And thank you to the staff as well. We also have to make sure that our staff get additional attention, because there'll be some who will want to overindulge and who want to take it out on our staff. We have to make sure that they get the help that they need. And to the police, the contribution they'll make. Thank everyone, Madam Chair, and thank you, and the Deputy City Manager as well. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Thompson. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Robinson, did you want to speak? Okay, then I'm going to reset the clock because I would just like to speak myself. I want to echo, Councillor Thompson, I want to echo your thanks because this is a great report, and staff were, as we questioned earlier, working on this for a long time because they knew the council was going to get here. Prior to the election even, we made the commitment that we would deal with this in 2023, so here we are. I'm going to be supporting all the motions. I welcome the additions, especially because they give us, I'm really pleased with the sample of these parks because they give us all of the types of things that you would want to look at. We have a couple of wards where they've proposed a lot, and so we'll have a feel for what if this was citywide by looking at Broadview, Danforth, and Davenport. We have Councillor Ainsley is very courageously bringing forward a picnic area that is a challenge from time to time. Councillor Ainsley, I once had to go and pick up my daughter and my grandchildren because at a barbecue for the birthday party of a toddler, by the end of the barbecue, all the dads were really beyond driving. And so she called and said, "We're not getting in this car. Can you come and get us?" And that was a family event. So these things happen. And that was a responsible action to take, not to drink and drive out of that park. So these things happen, but that gives us yet another different type of park to have a profile and some data on. And I think that's going to be really interesting. There's a real good sample here in these 20, now 22 parks. And perhaps one or two others may be added in our taking this item to council. But I will point out this. I asked my question about what will the criteria be like afterwards, because we've been kind of beating up the areas where the councillor has opted out, and in fact, a good many of them are because there's a real challenge in picking the right location. I almost was in the position of not having a viable location in my ward, and I was the mover of the original motion, so that wouldn't have been suitable. But we have these legacy design pieces to parks in some of the suburban areas that really made it challenging finding a park to recommend for the pilot. And there is the equity issues. Some were saying, I could recommend a park, but then there's confusion because I want to recommend one and yet I have two large parks and it'll be mayhem in the other. I received the assurance of staff that they're going to start. We really want this to be an educational experience as much as anything. And so my understanding from Mr. Grant is there'll be a warning and let me tell you how this works approach on the part of bylaw officers in both pilot parks and non-pilot parks, so that they'll be doing their normal enforcement, but also their enforcement and monitoring in the pilot parks to try and help people to be clear on what's currently happening. We'll certainly, we'll have a digital presence explaining that as well. That worked very well in Vancouver. People got around to, we want to have a picnic. That toddler birthday party where the dads are all going to dip into the cooler. And people were just hitting the website and trying to decide where to do it. But I go back to what my relatives said in my research. I asked my own relatives in Vancouver, how have you survived these 2 summers where we've been piloting this in parks? And the most compelling thing I heard was, yeah, it was kind of exciting the first long weekend, and this pilot will have 3 long weekends in it. But my sister-in-law said it was exciting the first long weekend, but by and large, each park in our city, and I think this is true of Toronto too, she said each park in our city has a culture of its own. And after the dust settled of this change, the culture of that park returned. So the skateboard park is still the skateboard park. The one with the man-made lake where people like to go for picnics and drink a bottle of wine, the culture remains the same, and so on and so forth, all the way to Stanley Park. And I think that's probably going to be the case in Toronto too, because as we all know, in our wards, if someone says, describe each and every one of your parks, I would do that same thing. I would describe the park's topography, but I would also tell you what goes on there and what the culture is of that park in that neighborhood. And that's really hard to shake. So we're gonna do this behavior management piece, but that neighborhood culture around that park is pretty dominant. And so I have great faith that it will prevail. So on that note, I'm going to take us to voting on the items. We just have the report before us and 2 additional motions. So in the order as placed? Okay, so first of all, on Councillor Moise's addition, all in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And then Councillor Ainsley had a motion. On Councillor Ainsley's courageous motion, all in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And lastly, on the report, on the pilot itself, all in favor? Opposed? Oh, sorry, can I, all in favor again? Okay, good. That is unanimous. Thank you, councillors. And now, Madam Vice Chair, I am looking for a motion to adjourn. Would you like to move that?
I would indeed.
Okay, all in favor?
Let's adjourn.
Opposed? That is carried. Thanks, councillors.